Many first home buyers we know aren't planning to stay in their first home forever. So this is where that asset quality discussion for your first home is so important. So if you're going to sell or upgrade or even relocate in the future, we want you to put yourself in the best position possible to see a property increase in value. Hello, and welcome to First Home Unlocked, the podcast for unlocking clarity and confidence for first home buyers. I'm Jack Elliott, National First Home Buyer Specialist at Alcove.
And I'm Chris Bates, ex-financial planner and mortgage broker.
Together, we are on a mission to empower you with the keys to unlock your first home. Let's jump in. Hello, and welcome back to First Home Unlocked. How are you today, Chris?
Doing well, Jack. I'm loving doing this with you. And we're quite a few episodes in now. Thank you for listening along at home or in the car, wherever you're listening to this right now. I'm super excited for today's episode. Like you know, Jack, I'm super passionate about this topic. And we as a business put a lot of value in what we do and have got a lot of expertise. We really try to not just help clients get finance, structure it the right way, but really help them make a good property decision, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue into today's episode, Chris. And you're right, it's a big part of the first home buyer journey and helping you through actually buying that quality asset. So today, that's what we're talking about, quality assets. So we're talking step 6 of the home buying journey that we're progressing through. So earlier on in our goals and visions episode, we talked about choosing a property that suits your needs now and into the future. But many first home buyers we know aren't planning to stay in their first home forever. So this is where that asset quality discussion for your first home is so important. So if you're going to sell or upgrade or even relocate in the future, we want you to put yourself in the best position possible to see a property increase in value. So no one has that crystal ball, but today we're going to talk through what to consider when you're looking for a high quality property. It doesn't start with the actual property though. It's actually a whole lot bigger than that. So Chris, as you mentioned, this has been a massive focus of yours and something that you're really excited about. So why do you think asset quality is so important for first home buyers to think about?
Yeah, I think the key part to that question there is for first home buyers. I mean, it absolutely matters for, whether you're upgrading or you're investing, but maybe not so much when you're a downsizer, right? Do you really need to make more money at that stage of your life? Yeah, I mean, the kids' inheritance would probably want you to be thinking about that, but it's not as catastrophic for you if you get it wrong. And often, when people have already got properties, if they're upgrading or investing, it slows down their overall wealth growth. But for first home buyers, you've worked so hard, you've worked on your career, maybe you've had a bit of fun, you've saved, and then all of a sudden you go and put all your cash into a property. And at some point, your life plan changes, right? You want to, maybe met a partner or you have kids that you want to upgrade. And really that's when I think you realize whether you bought a good asset or not. It's not right at the start. It's usually when they're looking to sell many years down the line, they go, oh, God, that really worked really well. Was that luck or skill? Or really, it would have been much better if I just bought something off the main road. It would have been a little bit better if I bought something with maybe a bit bigger bedrooms or better aspect. And there's these small things that over many years, and even over small time frames can make big differences to how your deposit changes. Because ultimately, when you sell that property one day, what you're trying to do is increase the amount of money you put in for your first home to be a bigger amount, because you're most likely going to have to spend more on the next property. So you really have to grow your wealth with that first property. And it's often one of the, there's challenges we have with first home buyers is reframing their thinking from, let's just get a property. Let's just tick that box to, this is an investment. We've actually got to try to grow our money because we're going to need to for our future plans.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you raised there, Chris. It's about looking at and having these conversations now and considering these things rather than just rushing in, talking about buying your first property and then having that feeling later down the track that, oh, I wish I took that more time up front. And this is what we see often. Most people begin their search on their real estate apps and choose the house based on the looks or convenience, and they skip this crucial groundwork. So instead of starting by browsing homes in your local area, we want you to zoom out. So start to ask yourself, which area suits your lifestyle and budget? Are you looking at living in the city or in a regional area? Which suburbs have that strong lifestyle factors for you now and potential buyers in the future? And then focus down on the street and the specific property. So what I want you to take away from this is don't get emotionally attached to one property too early. Instead, build your strategy from top down to make a more strategic decision that still aligns to your goals. So Chris, do you have any tips for first home buyers to help them avoid getting emotionally attached too early to properties?
Look, I think it's trying to remember that this isn't your forever home. Maybe for some first home buyers it is, right? Maybe they started a little bit later and they've invested in other things and now they've got this house and they really see themselves living there for 10, 20 years. But that's not usually the case for first home buyers. So really you're trying to use it as a bit of a stepping stone. And what you really want to focus on is it's got to suit what you need, right? And what's going to, suit your lifestyle over the coming period. But if you have to make compromises, maybe short-term compromises are better for the long-term reward in getting an asset that's actually likely to grow in value and then is actually going to give you some more cash for the next move. And that maybe next property is better suited to your needs rather than that one that you're likely to live in for a lot longer doesn't suit your needs. And so I think it's that sort of reframing in your mind. Yeah, you're buying a place to live in, but ultimately, if you were going to have a stage of life where you should focus more and more on whether the investment quality, I would say it's for first home buyers, which is a bit of a different thinking to the way a lot of first home buyers go about it.
Yeah, and it is. It's all about changing that way that you're thinking about your first property as well and just considering these other aspects. And I think to add to that as well, to detach emotionally is going and seeing multiple properties. I don't know how many times I've seen a first home buyer get pre-approval and go to the first open home and fall in love with it. So I think going through a whole heap of inspections, seeing different kinds of assets and comparing that as you're going along, I think is a great way to take that emotionality out of it. Of course, there's going to be emotions involved. It's your first home. It's an exciting time, but seeing multiple different properties just helps you see different kinds of assets and then make that really strategic decision as well, thinking of your long term.
Yeah, absolutely, Jack. I mean, we do that, right? So clients will be heading down one path and we'll go, oh, this is maybe not the best way. And what I'll often do, or yourself, we'll give them, reframe their thinking and give them an alternative solution, right? Why don't you just go and check out these type of properties? And they might be looking at a high density apartment in a city. And we say, well, why don't you just maybe go a little bit further out and get a small block of units near a train line that's really good access to the city, but it's a much better investment from a supply and demand point of view, which we'll talk about later on. And so, yeah, you're right. Otherwise, you get this confirmation bias. You get stuck in this sort of echo chamber and you're comparing lemons with lemons. And unfortunately, sometimes you need to see alternative solution. Go, oh, I can see what you're saying now. Oh, maybe I should follow down that. And maybe I could make that lifestyle work for me because I've sort of explored some new areas. And I do think there's home bias or just buying what you know, what feels familiar. Fortunately, one of the challenges first home buyers have is because a lot of them are living, apartment, city life, and they just want to keep living that life and they go and buy that for an investment when that's often not the best investment to buy.
Yeah, and I think as well, like you mentioned, Chris, it's about exposing yourself. It's about looking at all the different kind of options. We're not saying that you need to know everything and need to know this all yourself, but it's good to have them professionals that will ask the right questions, also retrain your thinking and make you look at different kind of options available before you make the final decision. So Chris, you talked about supply and demand and how important it is. So that's a great place that I like to start with first home buyers is getting them to zoom right out and understand actually how supply and demand works. So rising demand and limited or rare supply are what drive property prices up over time. So supply is what is available for buyers to purchase and demand is how many buyers are looking to purchase in an area at that time. So an important thing to think about with supply is how many homes of the same type are available in the area that you're looking on the market at that time. Now, if a home is one of hundreds just like it, or it can be easily rebuilt nearby, it's not rare. It's generally the value of these properties are lower. Now, when a property is rare or unique, the value is generally higher. So areas to look out for, like new development areas, or like you mentioned, Chris, off the plan apartments are often marketed as a more affordable option to first home buyers. So though they might seem affordable or modern, there are some issues to consider when making them decisions. So the new development areas generally don't have that scarcity factor because developers are able to just expand in the paddock next door. So if people can build the same type of property for the same price or even cheaper, this will lower the demand for your property and weaken the growth potential. Off the plan apartments are the same. They often don't perform well because of the oversupply. But there's actually some other considerations if you're thinking about purchasing an off the plan apartment. So you're locked into these purchase contracts months or years before settlement without finance clauses. Now, this far out, you can't get approved with the bank for a mortgage because they need to access that property to run a valuation. So that means if the bank values the property less than what's stated on the contract you've signed years ago or months ago, potentially, you'll have to come up with the difference yourself. So, Chris, what do you think about the new development areas and off the plan apartments?
You raised some really good points here around demand and supply. And when everyone talks to me about the property market, I say, well, there's not an Australian property market. There's not a Melbourne, a New South Wales or a Victorian. There's not a Sydney or Melbourne. There's not a Melbourne housing or a Melbourne apartment market. There's not a Melbourne, inner north housing market. It just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller because when you're buying property, you're buying one of like 11 million properties out there. You're not getting an index return. Not all properties grow at the same rate. Some go down. And a lot of people just don't understand that because those stories aren't shared at barbecues, right? They're just not talked about. No one wants to talk about the investment that lost the money or the first home buyer, that property that never went up in value. Everyone wants to talk it up, right? But if you look at CoreLogic, which is now called Cotality's Pain and Gain Report, you'll realize that a lot of people are losing a lot of money on properties and off the plan apartments, particularly in Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, have been some of the worst performers over the last couple of decades. So it's not opinion, this is just the fact of the challenges of when you're buying things that can be easily replicated. Because if you think about it just logically, if you could buy this, 2-bed apartment for $600,000 today, and a developer is also selling one, 100 meters down the road or even just across the road for $600,000, as a buyer, you'd be like, why would I buy old when I can buy new? And then you buy that new, and then it all of a sudden becomes old. And then 3 years later, you go to sell it, and then all of a sudden, developers still selling him at $600,000 down the road. And so you have this constant issue of more supply coming up. Even if prices do go up, that usually means the developer can make more money. So then they build even more. So that short-term price growth is usually quite limited. So that's definitely been the experiences in Melbourne and Brisbane. They've severely underperformed. Sydney, not so much, just because of a pure lack of being able to build and make it build profitably due to the cost of building and land. But often they're not the great investments. And a first-home buyer would be much better if they were buying in Brisbane or Melbourne or Sydney to either look at the older apartments and the townhouses and the villa units that are a bit further away from where they're building lots of supply. But yeah, I mean, I guess when you're thinking about supply, Jack, it's two things, right? It's, can they build more of what you're buying? If that's a no, that's great. You've got something called restricted supply. And if they are building more of them, you've got to really make sure that yours is going to be better than them. And that's really hard when you're buying something that's going to be easily replicated. And the second point is there a lot of them available? I guess one of my favorite sayings in property is hard to buy, easy to sell. And that's really what you're looking for. It should be quite difficult to buy your first home. Like, it should take you, like you said, look at lots of different properties. No. Yeah, let's consider this one. Oh, wait, there's strata issues. Wait, next one. It shouldn't just be like rock up, find a property, sign the contract, and on you go. Because if you do the hard work up front, usually in the future, when you look to sell it, you bought a scarce asset and it's really easy to sell and you're more likely to get a better price.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Chris. And I think that really sticks with me as well. And I wanted to stick with the listeners here is it should be hard to buy, easy to sell. That's what that kind of supply looks like. So we've broken down that supply and we've touched on demand. So let's break down demand in more detail here. So we also want to be looking at properties that have that high demand. So what that means is it desirable? What makes people want to buy and live there in that area? Is it close to jobs, schools, transports? What are the lifestyle factors like access to cafes, gyms, supermarkets? We want to be thinking, who actually wants to live in this area? Who will buy from me if I choose to sell in the future and upgrade? So before we zoom in and look at demand from a suburb, street and property view, Chris, I just wanted to run past, if I'm a first home buyer and I'm looking to upgrade, say in 10 years time, what kind of buyers do I want purchasing my property?
So really what I think about demand is, and this is, I think, a really good way, a litmus test, I call it, or a little bit of a test that you should be doing when you're buying a property. Because I love it. It's amazing. It really suits what I want, and you look at what you like about it. But you have to sort of step out of that and go, well, what other buyers would like it? If you're a single, you go, would a couple live here? Would a young family with 1 or 2 kids live here? Would a high income couple want to live here? Would a downsizer? Would a divorcee? Everyone's got sort of different buyer preferences. And ideally, if you think about it, what you'd want is the more different buyer pools that would want a property means more demand. And the second thing to think about is all those different buyer pools, they all have different means, right? They all have different incomes, different savings, different wealth. And ideally, if you could, you want a property that suits people with money, right? Because not only with money, but people who can borrow money. So usually people on, medium and high incomes. And so ideally a property that suits multiple buyer pools. And if you think about this from a studio apartment, no bedrooms, just a bed and a bath, a room, and maybe the kitchen is there as well. Maybe a single is happy to live there, absolutely. But even a couple's going to find it hard. A couple with kids, downsizers have got too much stuff. And so your buyer pool is really, really restricted. But if you go to, say, a 3-bed apartment, right? Like a single couple, couples with kids, couple with multiple kids, or a small 2-bed apartment versus a big 2-bed apartment. A small 2-bed apartment might be too small for, living area for a family, but a bigger 2-bed could absolutely work. And so you've just got to really think about, and also the location, different buyer pools. If, for example, it's an apartment 45 k's from the city in the middle of nowhere, does a high income family want to live there? Well, probably not, because they've got to get to the city every day. But, it might be close to the city. And so they go, well, yeah, a high income couple would like to live there. Or does it suit the downsizers where it's got no, single level access and no stairs? And so that's ideally what you want to be thinking about. I know this is quite a lot for people to sort of digest, but the concept is not so much what I want and what suits me. What would different buyer pools? And if you find that you're really limited to the more affordable part of the market, lower incomes and a small buyer pool, it's really not going to be likely that you're going to get a lot of growth from that property, because you do need that competition on sale day one day where you got a first home buyer and a downsizer and a couple and a family all trying to compete for this property, and maybe an investor in there as well. And that demand is what creates the competition, which pushes prices up.
Exactly right, Chris. And an easy way to look at it. So you obviously want to look at something that suits your lifestyle and your needs now to first purchase the property. But it's also, as you said, thinking about, is this going to be attractive to different buyer pools and different types of buyers in the future to really compete for that home and push that price up in the future? Now let's begin to zoom in. We've zoomed right out and looked at supply and demand and how that all works. So let's start zooming in. Let's break down the key features of a suburb that can help you decide to make a great quality asset purchase for your first home. So as we talked about in the Goals and Visions episode, you can start by assessing the lifestyle and livability of the area. Now, these factors are not only important for when you're living there now, but also for the future home buyers like we've talked about if you decide to sell. So these livability factors will help drive that demand. So some features to consider are, is there easy access to shops, schools, and public transport? What are the crime rates in the area? So you can actually search all of this information on the Domain Suburb profile as part of your research. And is there green spaces, access to green spaces and health services around? So Chris, I've mentioned a few there, but are there any other suburb factors that first home buyers need to be considering when looking at different suburbs?
Yeah, I think it's just being a little bit conscious that, suburbs are always changing as well. And sort of thinking, if it's maybe my dream suburb is X, suburb next door, which we call a bridesmaid suburb, offers pretty much all the same benefits, but it's a lot cheaper. And a lot of buyers will go to that suburb first that they prefer, and then go, oh, it's just a little bit out of budget. Actually, you know what? I've just seen this property down the road. I'll go there. And you might find that's often the better buying, is suburbs that offer a similar lifestyle for what you're looking for, but maybe a little bit more affordable.
Yeah, it's a good thing to consider as well. And looking, again, it comes back to looking at multiple areas, doing the test on each suburb and then narrowing it down and comparing a few while you're looking at that first property. So now we're starting to zoom right in. So let's talk about assessing the street and the specific property. So even within a good suburb, you find that good suburb, streets vary widely in that value. So let's discuss some things to consider about the street and the location of the property. So let's start with a main road versus a quiet street. So a home on a quiet tree-lined street is going to feel very different to one on a main busy road. And future home buyers will feel that and notice that too. So main roads often mean more traffic noise. You've got less privacy, limited on-street parking, and that can make it harder to sell in the future, especially to them families who might have safety concerns about living on a main road as well. Whereas a quiet street close to parks and schools creates more of that forever home feeling, and that can lead to a stronger emotional demand for you right now and in the future when you sell your home, and bring more of them buyer pools in like we mentioned before. So Chris, when you're looking at pre-approved clients, shortlisted properties, how much weight do you put on the actual street that it's on?
A lot, Jack. It's one of the first things I'll look at, right? Is I'll get the address from a client. I don't even look at the listing on REA or Domain first. I think that's next level. It's whether it gets through the first test, which is the location and the quality of the land. And yeah, you can do that through Google Maps and just jumping on the satellite. And so what I'll do is I'll put the address in, I'll zoom down to the sort of street level, put the satellite on, and then I'll go on Street View. That's amazing, the technology we can use today, right? Feels like just part of it, but it wasn't always like that. And if it is a busy road, you've got to really start to question that, because often there's a few challenges with it. When you sell it one day, it depends on how hot the market is. If the market is extremely hot and there's FOMO off the Richter scale, people are so desperate to buy that they just go, it's my only way in. And the premium that the main roads versus the better suburbs actually reduces. So you basically overpay for the poor roads in hot markets. But in down markets, you've got to think about it when you might have to sell it one day in a down market because you want to upgrade or your life plan changes. And people often look at it and go, yeah, I like it, it's nice, but I just don't want to live on that road. And a lot of buyers really don't want to avoid it, not just for the noise, the safety for families, which you mentioned, really difficulty having friends to come around. I mean, I've got a client literally trying to convince not to buy one on a road right now. It feels like the only way they can get into a suburb, but I'm trying to convince them to change suburbs. But you're right, it does have a huge impact, I believe, on growth if you have to sell it in a down market. If you get lucky, you buy it in a good market and you buy it at a good price, and then you sell it in a true FOMO market, which is only for a small period in a boom market. Not the whole boom's usually FOMO. It's usually just the tail end of a boom where people are so desperate. And so be really careful buying on a poor road.
Something to add to that, and thank you for sharing, is that yes, you're looking at the actual street, but as you said, you can look on Google Maps. Where's the main busy highway near that street as well? If it's only a couple of streets over, that's still going to have that noise effect. It's still technically busy near your street. So I think it's good to, yes, look at the actual street that you're looking on, but then look around the kind of surrounding streets. Where's the busy roads? What does that look like? What's the accessibility to that street as well? Is that going to really weigh you down over years and years of trying to get off a main busy highway into that street? So I think, again, looking at the actual street, but then looking at the areas around it and see what's available as well.
Yeah, I'll double down on that, Jack. You're absolutely right. It's, not just the main arterial roads. It's also rat runs within suburbs. There's certain streets that are just really not nice to drive on, or, and too close to train stations. And so it's not just the main roads for cars. There's also streets that are compromised because there's certain parts that in the suburb where there's less desirable suburbs or amenity or things that people don't want to live around. It's what the locals know. And it's really hard for first-time buyers to understand that. The best way, I think, if you're looking at a new suburb, I can figure this out pretty quickly, is you go and look at listings and sold properties over the last 12 months, and you can see usually where there's a lot more people selling. And that's the sort of hidden consequence that people don't realize until they go to sell it one day. And you'll find that on the poorer roads, people are buying and they're selling them a lot more because they move in and then they go, oh, I don't really like living here. And so the problem with that is that there's usually always choice on the market for buyers. There's usually other properties coming on that road, and buyers are like, well, yeah, if I miss out on this one, that's okay. Another one will come up on this road. It's not the best street in the suburb.
Yeah, that's a really good point to consider as well, Chris. And it's just about getting familiar with what the actual street looks like. Even go and test it. Go and drive there. If you're thinking about purchasing on a certain street, go and see what it feels like in person as well. Do your testing on Google Maps and things like that, but then go in person as well, because that'll show you more. Now, let's say you've now picked a street. So now it's beginning to look at the properties on that street. So which side of the street is the property on? So a north-facing backyard is preferred in Australia as it gets sunlight all day, especially in the cooler months. So this means you get natural light all day. You have warmer living areas in the winter, and you have that better airflow. So I know this might seem like a little thing, but those livability features like the sunlight and airflow, they're not just lifestyle perks. They impact your daily living in a positive way. And if you do sell, the future buyers will feel that as well. So Chris, is there anything else to consider when looking at the street you want to live on?
I mean, some streets are more prettier than others. Some have got trees and some have got rows and rows of character homes. I mean, that's sort of the dream outcome. You want a suburb a street where everyone's investing in their properties and they're making them nicer and, they're knocking them all down and building lots of new townhouses, etc. And so you sort of will get that feel. It's that vibe when you're driving down there in the car, look at the open inspection, you go, wow, this is actually a really nice street. What you'll find is that people buy in those streets and then they never sell. And you'll find that when you go look at some comparable sales in the suburb, there's just no sales to compare it with. That's the dream because it shows that everyone in the street's loving it and they're all investing in their properties. And so it should sort of do its talking for you. The North Rear is something that often first home buyers miss. They just haven't lived in lots of different properties before. Maybe they even lived in a north facing rear property and didn't even realize that that's what it was. But, that is one of the properties that people would buy and they go, oh, it's so nice in winter. And most properties aren't really selling in the peak of winter. They're selling in the autumn and spring, in the off seasons. Usually the sun's a little bit more forgiving in those time frames. And then they show the property at the time of day where it looks its best. So just be careful with that. But a property that's got a north facing rear is much nicer usually to live in through the winter period. And then it's usually just as nice in summer because it doesn't have the heat of summer and you get these cross breezes and things like that. So yeah, often first-time buyers don't put enough weighting on that. So if you can get a great street in a north rear and on the quieter street, you're already onto a bit of a winner, I say here. So that's why these things matter.
And I think I can speak from experience, Chris, being down in the southern state of Victoria. I think it's very important to have that north-facing backyard, especially with winter now extending. Feels like it's extending for half the year, just about, down here. So it's definitely important to think about these things up front. So we've narrowed down the suburb and the street. So the next step is to assess the specific property. So walking through the property and looking at inspections. So let's look at some key elements to consider when inspecting a home. The streetscape, as you mentioned, Chris, like what does that look like and what's the curb appeal? Some people fall in love with properties before they've walked through the front door. Surroundings. So what does the neighbours' properties look like? Is there nearby business buildings on that same street? And then going into the floor plan, is it logical? Is it light filled like we spoke about it? Does the layout make sense of the property? So let's take a look at neighbouring properties in a bit more detail. So are they well maintained? Do they reflect pride of ownership? Messy front yards, neglected homes, or them loud business buildings can affect buyer perception of the area and livability for you and your family. It can also affect valuation outcomes in some cases, which can impact what the bank is willing to lend you. So, Chris, how much attention do you give to neighbouring homes when reviewing a property with a client?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just the neighbour, it's the neighbours behind, it's a couple of doors down the road. It's like you said before, Jack, freeways, many streets away can be issues. And I think that what you want to be thinking about is that absolutely there's some deal breakers. I had a client just a couple of weeks ago wanted to buy next to a service station. I was like, have you not looked next door? Do you think a lot of buyers want to live next to a service station? So absolutely look over at your neighbour, both sides, over the back fence. What you want to be thinking about is ideally you want to be where there's lots of houses and also in an area where it's unlikely to change. You got to be looking at things like trees and eyesores, that big water tank out the back of properties or power lines, and check DAs in the area, development applications and things that might change that could impact your privacy, etc. But I mean, ideally what you want is, a couple of homes or surrounding you. And when you come back in 10 years time, or whenever you go to sell it one day, the situation is exactly the same. Yeah, people might have renovated, but they might not be affecting your property and your livability. You don't really want an apartment block overlooking your back fence. And so really be conscious of that. And privacy is something that a lot of first home buyers, they're the social generation. They're not too concerned about privacy, but, a lot of people are. And it really does hold your property back one day where people go, I love it. Great property, great street, but I don't think I can walk around the house naked.
And it's good things to consider, Chris, as well as, thinking about all these different questions that we're prompting to you and just really having them in the back of your mind as you're walking through that home. How does it feel? What's it going to look like in 2, 5, 10 years' time? And how is that going to impact the daily living for us right now? And then also into the future as well. So that brings us into the next point. So looking at the floor plan. So does it suit your current lifestyle and future lifestyle? So the things to ask yourself are the bedrooms well separated for privacy? Are there enough bedrooms that you need? Is there space for working from home, which is common these days, or for a growing family? And how usable is the outdoor area? As you mentioned, Chris, if there's an apartment building looking over your back fence, you're not going to want to go out and spend time in the outdoor area with family and friends. So if the layout makes life difficult, you will feel it every day. Future home buyers will feel it. So that limits that demand factor as well. So Chris, I know you've mentioned a few, but what are some other layout red flags that you see first home buyers often overlook?
Bedrooms often too small, different generations, properties, it just doesn't work. The kitchen and the lounge room, the living area is just not balanced. It's just quite tiny. And, you think, oh, it's nice, bedrooms are big, or 3 beds and there's a tiny living area. It's just unbalanced. Maybe it's not really well done for the light, and then it's closed off at the back, and that's your north rear. And you're like, oh, to change this is actually really expensive. And so, yeah, the layout's actually a thing that you often sort of just assume, because building's expensive, making changes and modifications to the property. And yes, you might have a good piece of land, but if the property itself just doesn't work on it, when you go to sell it one day, unless you do those modifications, a lot of buyers are looking and go, yeah, I'd love it, but I've got to renovate it. And I'd rather just buy something that's a bit closer and it's easier to renovate. So yeah, that can really hold your growth back, I feel, if you buy the property with the wrong layout.
It's so important considering that layout and that feel when you're inside the house looking through inspections and things as well. So when you are looking at homes, we also want you to look for features that make that home unique and rare, like a unique design or original character, a versatile layout that could suit different buyers in the future, couples, families, downsizers, if you're intending to sell in the future, which increases that demand. Now, is this type of home rare, or is it easily replicated or be able to found somewhere else? Again, if you can buy or build the same home cheaper, it won't attract as much demand in the future. While the building itself does matter, the land on which it's built on is even more important when selecting a quality property. So buildings depreciate over time. The building, the fittings, they can all age very quickly, whereas the land appreciates or grows in value, especially in the areas of limited supply of land available for new homes. So Chris, how does understanding this actually help first home buyers to find a good quality asset?
No, I just want to touch on something that we might, hopefully not deceiving first home buyers here. When we say unique, we don't want something that is a triangle, a block, and a house that looks like a spaceship and it's got 3 different levels and it just doesn't work as a family. That's too unique. So, but you don't want something that just feels like a cookie cutter apartment or like a brand new townhouse where everything's the same and it's easily replicable. A row of terraces, yeah, they might not feel unique because they're 6 in a row, but they are. They're sort of got beautiful frontages that aren't replicable nowadays because they were built 100 years ago. And why they sort of are a little rare is because every year people are renovating and they're living in them longer, and there are less of them coming on the market every year because people are holding them, whether they're investors or home buyers. So hopefully, this just, I guess, highlights just for first home buyers that what you buy really does matter. And when you go sell it one day, you're going to go, oh, I'm so glad I did that extra work up front to actually take the time to get a good asset, because that's actually turned into hundreds of thousands of dollars more down the line because you didn't rush it. And buying property isn't easy. We know how stressful it is. That's why we're doing this whole podcast. Is we know it's hard, but just because it's hard, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And I think that's what we really want to just help first home buyers is do the hard yards up front. And then in the years down the line, you'll thank your future self and you'll go, yeah, God, it was really worth it. Because at time and time again, I've seen clients who have rushed it from a first home buyer point of view. And down the line, they want to upgrade and they go, oh, it just hasn't worked. So it would have actually been better off renting, leaving their money in, say, shares and just getting shares compounding growth over the last 5 years versus just falling to sort of society's pressure just to get an asset and then it never actually working for them. So just hopefully that helps.
And that's what the whole point of this podcast is, as you mentioned, Chris. It's about giving you all the information that you need so you can make them more strategic decisions, feeling that confident about it as well and making them decisions. So I just wanted to touch on, before we wrap up today, just the importance of the land that you're buying. So for example, if you've found a rare piece of land or a big block in a suburb that can't be built into, you've got the right suburb, the right street, and the land positioning's got that north-facing backyard, but the building might need a little bit of work, that's still a great option to consider because, as we mentioned, the value is in the land of what you are purchasing. Would you agree, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the land goes up, buildings go down. It's a common one. It's not to say you can just buy any piece of land. Every piece of land grows at different rates, but it's a great philosophy just to firstly understand what goes up, what goes down.
Exactly right. So we don't want you to start by falling in love with a house. We want you to start understanding where the strongest opportunities are based on that real scarcity, demand, and long-term appeal for your situation. Now, if you get this foundation right, you give yourself the best chance of buying something that not only works for your lifestyle today, but it sets you up financially for years to come. And then we want you to look from the outside in. So what we talked about through this episode, looking in at the suburb, the street, and then the property itself, and assess the livability at all these levels. They're so important for what you're buying and living in now, but also if you decide to sell in the future. So everything we've talked about today, we've put it all in a simple checklist for you. So head to firsthomeunlocked.com.au or click the link in the show notes to download our free asset quality checklist. Thank you so much for joining us on First Home Unlocked. Next week, we're covering the next major step in the buying journey, which is how to make a confident offer and what to include when the time comes. Thanks for your time today, Chris. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Jack. It was a good one.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd really appreciate if you could do us a huge favour. Share this episode with any first home buyers that you know so we can help more people like you feel clear, calm and confident when purchasing their first property. You can join our Facebook group, First Home Unlocked, to continue the conversation with other first home buyers. Or if you're ready to unlock your first home, you can book a get to know you chat by using the link in the show notes or by going to firsthomeunlocked.com.au. Before we go, just a reminder that everything we share on this podcast is general in nature and not tailored to your personal situation. We always recommend seeking advice from a qualified and experienced professional when making financial decisions.